Good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming along to our online event this evening. We are live on Facebook and Zoom webinar, and thank you for joining us. My name is Charlotte. I'm a Youth Project Officer for North Wales Wildlife Trust's Our Wild Coast project. Our Wild Coast is one of 31 Our Bright Future projects across the UK, funded by the National Lottery Community Fund. Our project has been running activities with young people across North Wales since 2016. We've engaged young people with their local wildlife and conservation through a wide variety of activities. A number of the young people we work with have formed local action forums, providing them with platforms to turn their passion for wildlife, conservation and the environment into positive action, enabling them to reach out to communities, run public engagement events, as well as engaging with various campaigns. This evening, we are joined by two of our young people, Megan and Jacob, who are representatives of the project's local action forums and the Our Bright Future National Forum as well. And they will be in discussion with two members of the Senedd who have joined us this evening, Janet Finch-Saunders and Llyr Gruffudd. During this pre-election period, it's important to remember that North Wales Wildlife Trust are an apolitical organisation, and we are unable to promote or favour any political party over another. And representatives from all political parties were invited to take part in this discussion. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to our chair for the event, Jonathon Dawes, who will take the reins from here and give you an outline of what this evening holds. He is finishing up his time as member of Welsh Youth Parliament for the Vale of Clwyd, and this event would not have been possible without him. So over to you, Jonathon, to take the reins for the evening. Thank you.
Well, Charlotte, what a fantastic introduction. I tell you what, I couldn't have asked, I didn't even ask my parents to do a better introduction than that. Yes, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Future of Environmentalism in North Wales event. As I've already been said, my name is Jonathon Dawes, and I'm the first and outgoing member of Welsh Youth Parliament for the Vale of Clwyd, and above all else, a passionate environmentalist. Now, it is an absolute privilege to be here this evening as your host, and alongside me are two incredible young people in Jacob and Megan. But of course, I have the great privilege of welcoming and introducing to you our members of the Senedd. Now, I haven't given them any pre-warning, so I hope they don't mind me saying this. I see Lyr's laughing and Janet too, but I would describe these two as Welsh political heavyweights, I say. They are two incredible individuals who were both elected to the Senedd in the same year, in 2011, and to represent their constituencies, and are very, very outspoken environmentalists. But above all else, have been fantastic supporters of my work since I was elected, and are two very lovely people. So the first, Janet Finch-Saunders, who is a member of the Senedd for Aberconwy, and is the Welsh Conservative Shadow Cabinet Secretary for the Environment, Rural Affairs and Energy. And of course, let's not forget Llyr Gruffudd MS, who's a member of the Senedd for North Wales, and is the Plaid Cymru spokesperson for Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs. Now, before we get cracking, I've just got to hand over very quickly to Roberta, who is the Policy and Advocacy Manager at North Wales Wildlife, at the Our Bright Future, to say a few words on the key asks. So, Roberta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jonathon. So, hi all, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, this evening. So I will give you just a brief story, more information about how the three asks that we will cover this evening were created in the first place. As Charlotte said, Our Bright Future is a program of 31 projects, bringing the youth sector, so young people, and the environmental sector together across the UK. And when I started some years ago, the first thing that I did on my role was to co-create three asks with young people and youth workers that were part of Our Bright Future. So we collected the voices of young people through workshops, youth-led research. We collated 700 ideas, and all of this work then ended into like a 3 clear asks that the young people care for. The first one is learning in and about nature. The second one is that young people want to support to get into green jobs. The third one is for young people to have their voices heard by policymakers, decision makers, and sit around the table when decisions are made. So then what we have done after creating the asks is that we try to take this forward in various ways. And the event today is one of the ways that like these really can be turned into reality, the 3 asks. What we did for the first ask was ask for an inquiry, the Education Select Committee, an inquiry for outdoor learning to highlight the role that our learning can cover to in going after the a COVID-19 crisis, to address the COVID-19 crisis for children and young people in terms of their health and well-being, and their then also from their learning point of view. That wasn't accepted, wasn't taken forward, but we received a great media coverage, including a BBC survey to young people that asked 83% children of the children surveyed said that they really are behind an idea of more outdoor learning. For the second ask, we created a report collecting all the evidence behind the fact that environmental projects can really offer support to young people to get into jobs, to increase their employability, and that is available on our website. We are working with a group of charities, so environmental and youth-focused charities, to push for this idea, to influence this idea forward of getting more funding in support of young people to get into the green sector, environmental sector. And for the third ask, these are the real opportunities for young people to have their voices heard. So I'm grateful to be part of today's evening event, and thank you for the speakers to have joined us, because that's really the point of getting the young people to get their voice heard by policymakers. And we are now organizing a series of webinars for young people in the running up to the elections, the local elections and the national elections, and the next one will be at the end of the month. So lots of things going on, but I don't want to take more of your time because it's really your event. So I'll hand over to Megan, and I really look forward to hearing more from your views, your voices, and your questions to the speakers and to the members of the Senedd today. Thank you, Jonathon, and I'll hand over to Megan now. Thank you. And you are on mute, Megan.
I am on mute.
No problem.
Hopefully that won't happen again. So yeah, I'm Megan, and I'm one of the Our Bright Future representatives for the North Wales Wildlife Trust. I've been part of the Morn Action Forum for just over a year now, I'd say, and I'm really enjoying it. I've been part of the Our Bright Future project for just a few months, and it's been an amazing opportunity. I'm in university. I study zoology with conservation, and I'm in my second year. So really the second ask that's most relevant to me, looking for opportunities to get into the green sector, which is really quite exciting. I grew up in North Wales. I live in Snowdonia, and I feel like the environment is part of who I am. I love spending time in the outdoors. It helps my mental health, it helps my physical health, and I wanted to kind of get into this as a career, so that's why I've studied what I'm studying currently. I started volunteering with the North Wales Wildlife Trust to gain some kind of first-hand experience in the sector, and one of the projects that I managed to get onto was the Our World Coast project, which was funded by Our Bright Future. This project was amazing and is unfortunately coming to an end in a few weeks. It was amazing because it engaged with school groups and with homeschool groups like Jacob, and it took school groups out into nature and really embodied the first ask. For me personally, it gave me an insight into the sector and gave me a lot of valuable experience engaging with young people. I managed to get a training opportunity with the traineeships that they held, which gave me first-hand conservation experience. and has led me on to tonight, where I'm able to talk to Janet and Llyr, and I can have my voice heard, which is amazing. So I feel like that project is a prime example of embodying all three asks. With the asks overall, one of my favourite things about them is the actual way that they came about, and I think that that's really crucial. They were created by young people for young people, effectively, and I don't think you can get a better way of directing what young people want than that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Megan. And Jacob, if I could have a comment on you on the importance of the free ask before we get cracking, that would be fantastic.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. As Megan said before, I am from the home educated community, and this has allowed me to have some sort of flexibility in my schedule, as if I can manage to get a lot of my studying done throughout the week, I can have time to do a lot of these conservation and nature related activities. So it's more about the flexibility in that side of things. But being home educated and on this project has allowed me to be lucky enough to experience all three of these asks to some extent, as throughout the project I have felt as though my voice has been heard quite a bit in events much like this one. And I can safely say that they have allowed me to be more confident in myself and have helped me to be able to work a lot better in group situations. I am like a GCSE student, and I am looking to enter the environmental sector and pursue that conservation as a career. So I'm sort of before going to uni, so I'm not at the stage which Megan's at. I'm at the stage a few stages before, but I will one day be there, and it's quite important that I feel as though these asks are carried on throughout these years.
Well, thank you both for outlining your passionate summaries on the different issues and the asks that we're going to be discussing tonight. Now, I think let's get cracking. Let's get on to our first ask. So the first ask is more time spent learning in and about nature. Now, before I ask the panelists their views on this topic, can I come back to you very quickly, Jacob? Obviously, you've already said that you are in homeschool, so you could offer a very unique perspective on the benefits of learning outside. So if you could, the floor is yours really, Jacob, if you could give a couple of words on that, please.
Yes, being homeschooled, I don't need to be sat in a classroom to do my work. So I can take it down to my local park or local nature reserve, sit there with my revision books and everything, and read all of the things I need to know in order to do my exams. But and this has had a very positive effect, as it's been able to help mental health wise, and it's also good for physical health, the fresh air and being not trapped in a room for so many hours of a day. It's helped at that sort of stage, and it shows that even if the outdoor learning were to be a thing, it doesn't necessarily need to be nature focused, although that would be quite a nice thing to have on top of that. It doesn't have to be focused about learning about different species or something like that. It could be just taking the classroom outside and reading from the textbooks and writing the notes and teaching outside, basically.
Well, thank you for that, Jake. And I think that it's fantastic to have your perspective on this, because, I wasn't homeschooled. I went to real high school and I had a fairly normal education. That's probably the best way to say this. So you giving your unique perspective on this, I think really sets the tone for the ask that's about to come up. So thank you very much for that. Now, the question of outdoor learning, in my view, has never been more important. As I'm sure the Senedd members very well know, and a lot of people here today, is that the new curriculum bill passed the floor of the Senedd just last week and will be implemented in September 22 academic year. Now, Llyr, if I could just come to you first, so given this is probably I should say it is the biggest educational change since the start of devolution, is that what is your view on outdoor learning, and where do you see this fitting into the new curriculum, given the areas of learning, the potential ambiguity that could come with it?
Yeah, well, I'm a big supporter of outdoor learning, and I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's reminded us all, hasn't it, really, that, you know, access to green space and access to nature is just so important. If I don't get my half an hour away from the screen and out of the house every day, then it drives me crazy. And, you know, that isn't really something I valued before the pandemic, if I'm honest, because I didn't really think about it. But all of a sudden, I think we're reminded, you know, that reconnection with nature is good for our physical health, it's good for our mental health. And I think embedding that and those opportunities into learning and into education is important, because you're establishing, you know, habits for a lifetime, potentially, amongst the younger generation, and we really need to be doing that. In relation to the curriculum and assessment bill itself, you may know, of course, that I actually tabled amendments to that bill a couple of weeks ago when it was debated. Now, the intention of my amendments was to add climate crisis and ecological emergency to the list of mandatory elements within the areas of learning and experience. The bill was already establishing, you know, areas around relationships and sexuality, education, religion, values and ethics as another area, you know, English and Welsh obviously central to it. Well, I wanted to add climate and nature or ecological emergency, because, you know, clearly when we declared a climate emergency, then you expect everything to change. And I think that one of the biggest drivers, certainly for change, is the curriculum, because we need climate conscious people coming through. We need young people being empowered, really, to understand, you know, what the impacts of climate change are, how it affects your and our lives. And, you know, if we're preparing people to go into work in 5, 10, maybe 15 years for the younger kids, then clearly it's going to be a very different world by the time we get there. So I put forward amendments to embed climate and nature into the curriculum. Sadly, those amendments were defeated, primarily by the Labour government, who decided to vote against. I also wanted to equip teachers through their teacher training with the skills to really you know, really sort of present it in a way that engages young people and really sort of helps with that understanding. I'd worked with Teach the Future, which is an organisation that's been working towards this, a group of young people from across Wales who've been promoting this within the curriculum. The fact that the amendments weren't passed doesn't mean that we're giving up. You know, clearly the elections are coming up in May, so we'll have to sort of re-engage, hopefully, with whichever colour government there is in Wales after the election in May. And we know that a lot of the environmental organisations are calling for eco-literacy, you know, to be embedded into the curriculum as well, which is something I'm, you know, fully supportive of and quite passionate about, really. So yeah, there's an opportunity to do something. Okay, the curriculum assessment bill opportunity was, you know, was missed in a sense, regrettably, despite, you know, our efforts. But there will be other opportunities, I'm sure, to make sure that it gets the kind of space within the curriculum and within the school timetable that it deserves. It also means, of course, making sure that those schools have appropriate access to areas that they can use for this purpose. But it's about sort of life habits, and, you know, the sooner you start, the better.
Well, thank you for that, Llyr. And do you know what? I took my mind back just a couple of days ago to when we first met, when you came to speak at my sixth form. And I knew you were good then, but I didn't think you were that good that you were going to steal my next question, because my next question was going to be about your amendments. But do you know what? You killed two birds with one stone. So do you know what? Big thumbs up from me, Llyr, I do say. But yeah, thank you for that. And I think you're giving some really important, valuable perspectives on the education side of the environment and what we should be doing. Now, if I could just go to you, Megan, next. Someone who's currently studying at university, if you could cast your mind back to when you were in primary school, secondary school, or doing your A-levels, would outdoor learning have benefited you at all?
I think it would have, mainly for the mental and physical benefits that the outdoors kind of provides you with. But I also think that learning outdoors, it sets something that I'm particularly passionate about, which is grabbing the curiosity and engaging kids at a young age in nature. For me, I always had a passion for the environment. I know exactly what I wanted to do, but I know some people that might not have been as enamoured and have wanted to go and study other things and have wanted to move out of Wales or into the city because they don't think they have the facilities and stuff here, which is a different issue. But I do sometimes think if outdoor learning was something that we were provided more with in school, that might have changed what they were interested in at those younger ages. And I think going back to what this ask is more time spent learning outdoors in and about nature is kind of a fundamental answer to having a better future for the environment. Because if you're engaging young people in the environment at young ages, then you will either produce people who want to go and research the environment or who want to do an environmental job, or you'll produce people who respect the environment and who won't be people who throw litter or will sign a petition to better the environment. So it kind of covers all bases, whether you produce people who want to go into environmental jobs or not. Everyone will have that respect for the environment if they are engaged in it at a young age.
You know what? I think you're absolutely bang on the money there. And the reason I say that is, as you say, it's not just about getting people into environmental jobs. It's the ripple effect of having it in the education system that's going to benefit so many other people. And I know Janet and Llyr know this, and they know how much I love a good game of tennis. But my career is as a tennis coach, and I picked that up, first of all, from school. And I would have never, ever got to that position if those opportunities weren't available in my school. And I think the same applies for the environment too. So John, that is an absolutely fantastic point. So thank you for that. Now, moving on to you, Janet, next, if that's okay. Now, I know that we've done a lot of work together in relation to the new curriculum bill when you were, of course, on the Children and Young People Committee. But what are your views on outdoor learning? And again, similar to Llyr, where do you see this fitting into the wider curriculum?
Thank you, Jonathan. And firstly, before I start speaking, can I just thank you all for actually giving us, as elected politicians, the chance to engage with you. I've known you a long time, Jonathan, and, it's that kind of enthusiasm that really we need to, as elected politicians, we need to engage more, with younger people like yourselves. And, when I looked at your ask number one, I thought, isn't it sad that here we are having to ask for that now? When I grew up, when I was in school, we used to have regular, certainly in primary school, I used to spend a lot of time outside my classroom setting where we used to go on nature walks. So we learned about biodiversity and conservation. And I'm not going to tell you how many years ago that was, but there was more time in the school curriculum. And then again in my secondary school, we did far more outdoors then than we do now. So whilst we have gone forward in terms of technology and digitalisation, we've really gone backwards in terms of allowing our young children and, older students to actually engage with nature as part of their learning experiences. And interestingly enough, a point that Llyr mentioned earlier about his half an hour getting out, for exercise. But I found when we were first in lockdown, someone who's always out and about, I like to go out in the constituency. That's my sort of, just sitting in an office doesn't cut it for me. You learn far more actually going out and engaging with people, and it's a beautiful constituency. So again, that it's good for me when I'm able to get out and do that. But interestingly, when you're sat in these Zoom screens, sometimes it can be 12 hours a day. But I made a point during the first lockdown of going outside and actually doing my work outside. And it was just little things that I noticed. I mean, the bird song, that where we live, you can see it's pretty rural. Things like the squirrels. We have squirrels coming in our garden. we have a little weasel that keeps running around our rocks and things, but those are all the sort of things that I sort of had ownership of from a child. So then it's made me love the environment. It's made me love conservation and nature and biodiversity. And there's the point that you made, Jonathan, about how you learned it as a younger person. And what grieves me at the moment, I'm at the moment liaising with some English local authorities, because what I cannot understand is that we're now within my own constituency, we're losing outdoor education centres. They've decided to close a couple down at a time when it's been predominantly evident that again, that's the backward move. Why now, when we've all recognised that COVID, that it's important that we sort of work outdoors, and we have education courses that help people and young people from different areas. They come into Wales, and young people, and it's a given when I've spoken to the instructors at these outdoor centres, how children sometimes can't engage with other peers, or they can't engage with their families. They come here, and then when they engage with nature, it just makes them a far more rounded child with far more skills that they just would not obtain if they weren't working out in the outdoors. And of course, in my generation, there was the Cubs, the Scouts, the Brownies and the Guides, and you'd go away on camps and things like that. And we've become far too those sort of things now with health and safety. They're not as predominant as they were. And well, I don't think it did me any harm. And I have lots of friends who, engage with nature at a very young age, and they're still engaging with nature now.
Well, again, thank you so much for that, Janet. I think you've given a really sort of interesting perspective in the sense of how it's changed over time. And I suppose it's sort of asking the question is where we went wrong and why we went wrong. And I think that's something that we will certainly come on to in a second. Just before we go on to some Q&As from our audience. So audience, if you can, I've already got a set of questions that have come through, but if you do have any on this topic, please send them through over the next couple of minutes and I will put them to our panel. So Jacob, just before I move on, do you have anything to say, given what Janet, Llyr and Megan have said, given that you've obviously had a lot of experience in this area and know lots of good practice?
Yes, I would like to comment on the sort of topic that's been touched on with the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's influenced our sort of attitude towards wanting to be out in nature. And I sort of just thought that it would sort of benefit schools if they were to do a couple of lessons outdoors, as it would be able to provide that fresh air, which would be good for students, both mental health and physical health, which is very important given the pandemic. It's important that they have that sort of health benefits from being outside. And it would also allow them to keep the safe distance apart, as there would be more space for them to sort of work in, and it would also allow them to concentrate a lot better, because I find, and I'm sure a lot of other people would find, that being in nature is like, you get a lot of thoughts which you wouldn't necessarily get if you're indoors or stuck in a small room and having to write something down repetitively. You'd be able to think of new and interesting ideas as to how you could approach something. And I think that it would sort of be really important with the whole COVID-19 pandemic to avoid the being inside as much as possible. And that's also where the outdoor learning could be a plus in sort of the general education system and the new curriculum.
Again, I do you know what, Jacob, I really do value your opinion on this, because me, Janet, Llyr and Megan will of course have ideas on what we would actually like it to be, but you've got first-hand experience of what it can be. So it is really useful to hear your perspective on that. Well, can I just say it's been an absolutely incredible discussion on on the first Ask. And I'm just going to present everybody now with a couple of questions that I've had via the chat function. I'm going to try and target them based on what you've all just said. and give you questions that are tailored to your basically what you've included in your initial contributions. So I'm going to give this one to Janet, if that's okay, is how can school staff be better supported to be given confidence to take students outside to learn?
Well, I think what has been a retrograde step over the years is there's been this sort of culture change, hasn't there, whereby, you know, people have felt we can't get people coming forward now as well as they did over the years ago to say run outdoor groups, you know, to run organisations where activities are taking place, because, you know, people just, I think health and safety, there is so much, you know, I've spoken to people who used to actually be engaged in even with sports, you know, teaching youngsters sports and things, and sometimes it can be a minefield when you're filling in the forms for the insurance to ensure, you know, the risk assessments, and they become so like not just unwieldy, but putting the responsibility firmly on those, you know, people supervising, and the responsibilities. People nowadays say to me, I am so frightened of something going wrong. Whereas I think, you know, going back to my youth, maybe, you know, it was more about teaching the children those skills so that in the end, the children were it's like reverse cycle. There was a risk element involved in things that we did, and it made us aware of the risks. And we seem to have just, it's almost like, oh, it would be too dangerous to take children out and do that, rather than equipping them with the skills, the experience, so that should they get themselves into a situation later on in life, you would know how to deal with it. So I think we have stepped back, you know, and I think insurance is one, health and safety is another. And it's almost now that people are frightened of taking those risks, frightened of being responsible for half a dozen children. You know, yeah, I genuinely think that there needs to be more balance and proportionality brought into the equation, and taking a risk for children is all part of growing up.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic, Janet. Thank you for that. The next question I'm just going to put forwards, I think I'm going to give this one to Llyr, given your amendments in the Senedd just last week. Is it down to individual schools or the government to decide if young people get an hour outdoors every day?
Well, I mean, the government can clearly set the parameters and set the criteria in terms of what experiences young people should be getting out of education, but then it's down to local authorities and individual schools and teachers to implement that, I suppose. I mean, I'd say, you know, a lot of this could potentially go back to teacher training. You know, we can be a bit critical and say that teachers don't give young people the opportunities we used to have years ago. Well, you know, I'd imagine that the training they get is very different to what they had years ago. So they need to be given the skills and the knowledge, you know, required in terms of how you can best utilize outdoors for learning. I'm sure there's an element of that, but whether that's sort of sufficient or not is questionable. The other point as well, of course, is you need appropriate learning spaces outdoors. You know, you need those spaces sort of hardwired into school designs, and it's probably, you know, it's much more prominent now when you're building new schools. But of course, a lot of our children are still being taught in schools that were built 100 years ago. So, you know, there are questions there. And I think the point Janet made about sort of this sort of risk-averse culture that's sort of true across the whole public sector, in fact, and most sectors really. It's there for a reason, and I understand that, but sometimes you do feel that, you know, maybe we need to sort of interpret things in a slightly different way, because, you know, crossing the road is a risk, isn't it? As long as you're sort of careful and you know, proper about the way you do it, then that's okay. And, you know, there is a pressure in the system as well for teachers to deliver results. And sometimes I think thinking a little bit, and I'm not saying, you know, outdoor learning is thinking outside the box necessarily, but, you know, some people will see it as, you know, another hurdle, another challenge, and see the problems and not see the opportunities. You know, that might be a cultural thing, maybe. and certainly isn't true of all schools. I mean, I've been to some schools where, you know, the culture is absolutely the culture we want to pursue. There's one not too far from where Janet sat this evening.
I know the school you mean.
Yeah. So, you know, there are opportunities there. And I think the pandemic, as somebody mentioned earlier, does give us that opportunity just to reset a little bit and recast, you know, the system, because, you know, we're doing it in our personal lives, we're doing it in our working lives. I'm hoping people will do it in school lives as well. And if not, then it is a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I completely agree. One last question I'm just going to put forward, as we've had quite a lot for you, but I'm just wary of time and how many things we've got to get through this evening. This is to Jacob and Megan. And the question is from Facebook, actually, from the Facebook live stream. Is the two things that have got us through lockdown are our local environments and our local communities. How can we make sure that the most of it, how can we make sure that we make the most of this in coming years? And I suppose the way I would phrase this question to you, Jacob and Megan, as two people who spend a lot of time outdoors, is what are your tips and tricks on how where people can make the most of their time outdoors?
Mind if I go first, Jacob?
Go for it.
I'd probably say if you've got a garden, take advantage of your garden. You know, plant food, plant flowers, because you can make quite a little biodiverse habitat if you take advantage of your garden properly. If you don't have a garden, take advantage of a windowsill with windowsill boxes. I'd also say, since we're in Wales, don't be afraid of a little rain. You know, it's an amazing feeling going for a walk in the rain if you dress appropriately. And just because it's not sunny all the time does not mean that it's an excuse to not go outside. So yeah, that would be my advice. Just take advantage of any opportunity you can.
Some sound advice. Jacob, if I could go on to you, please.
Yeah, my advice would be sort of similar to Megan's in that look to see what's closest to you in terms of like wild spaces and being outdoors, because there is some point to traveling quite a bit away if it's like safe to and stuff, but there's more to be seen on your local doorstep, on like your doorstep, than you really know about and you'll be there for like several months, if not years, trying to figure out as much as you can about your local area in terms of wild spaces, than if you went to somewhere completely new, because a lot of the wildlife would be very similar to what would be in your local area. And if you can walk to like a pond and see a frog or something, instead of having to drive half an hour to a similar pond to see the same frog, you might as well do the walk, and you might see some of your friends in your local community and you can have a little chat and explain different things that you've come across in the pond area. And just, yeah, so don't underestimate like local spaces, because it's where you find some of the best wildlife you can.
Do you know what? I think that is some sound advice there. And I tell you what, I'm going to give everyone my old age here. I'm 18 years old and I went for a walk just 2 weeks ago. And I found some wild spaces in Rhyl that I didn't even know previously existed. And I've lived there my entire life. So I think that is some real good advice there, Jacob. Now, moving on to Ask 2 is support to get into environmental jobs. And I think that this is certainly a more important issue than it was a couple of years ago. It's been raised up through words like green recovery, green transition. Again, what Llyr was saying really about the reset and what we can do. And I think there is certainly a lot of potential in North Wales for green jobs. However, just before we get cracking, could I ask Jacob and Megan to give their views on the current provision of green jobs in North Wales? If we could start with you, Megan, and then move on to Jacob.
Well, you know, since I'm almost coming to my kind of university experience now, and I'm just trying to look for potential experiences, potential graduate jobs, and I've kind of come to the realization that for the kind of job that I want, I might not get it until, you know, I'm closer to 30, because it's so difficult and it's so competitive to get into conservation jobs. you know, I've kind of accepted that I'm going to have to look for non-paid work, volunteering, which isn't really sustainable as a young person wanting to kind of live independently and all that. And you know, I might not be able to with that kind of prospect, I might not be able to buy a house until, you know, I'm a lot older, and that's just kind of the kind of thing that I've accepted now. And I think one of the most important things, because we need more conservationists, we need more environmentalists, is that these barriers that are there for people who want those kind of jobs, and this is just as in Wales, this is, you know, globally, conservation is a very competitive field that I particularly want to get into, but I think it's something that does put a lot of people off, and you've got to make the barriers less of a big jump in order to get more people, especially young people, into essential roles that we need. So that's one of the most important things I think we need to do looking forward.
Yeah, I completely agree again. Jacob, could I come to you on this? I know that you're obviously a bit younger, but I know that in preparation for the panel today, as we had a quick chat about this topic just last week, what are your views on green jobs, in particular in North Wales?
Okay, so like I previously mentioned, I am a homeschooled GCSE student, and a lot of my GCSEs are environmental, like focused things like environmental management, biology, and geography. And I did choose these because I wanted to do a career in nature and conservation. However, I did look like around online and in my local area to see what career paths I might be able to take in the future. And I was shocked to see that there's a very small amount of career paths in the environmental sector that I could actually find. And a lot of them I was like probably going to end up either not getting or being very underqualified for. And I think that the problem is that there is a lack of jobs rather than the fact that they are really hard to get into, because if there are more jobs, then the jobs which are already existing would be a bit easier to get into and might encourage more people to pursue this as a career option rather than go online, look it up, see if it's a viable career option. Notice that they'd have to do I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years of a couple of years of unpaid work before they can actually start making any sort of money from working in the environmental sector. And I think that's what will discourage a lot of environmental conservationists and environmental scientists from wanting to pursue this as a career option.
No, I think absolutely agree. I think there's really, really solid points from both of you. And just before I give my 2 pence on this, is that we've got some fantastic questions coming through the chat, so keep them coming. As I think that given that we've sat down with 2 policymakers, 2 spokespersons for their respective parties, and if either of them are successful in the Senedd elections, they will have jurisdiction over this area. I think it's important that we get these questions coming, so keep them coming. They're fantastic, and I look forward to asking them in just a matter of minutes. Now, I know I spoke to both Llyr and Janet previously about green jobs, and it's something that, or the lack of them, I should say, and it's something that I passionately raised in my time as a Welsh Youth Parliament member time and time again. And I think it's something too that young people desperately want to see, they desperately care about, and it's something that is often brought up with me. Now, a lot of young people are just generally worried about their employment prospects in North Wales as a whole. And we know all the data is showing that we are seeing a massive brain drain. So many young, talented people from North Wales are leaving North Wales. They're going to university, if it's in cities in the north or London, and they're never coming back. And I think that that is a big issue that I think that the next government, the next Welsh government, whoever that may be, there's a lot of potential for to build these jobs. Now, this considered, earlier this year, is the UK government released a 10-point green plan to deal with an emphasis on green jobs. So if I could just go back now to the Senedd members, is that what would you do to kickstart the green revolution in North Wales and keep the green jobs we've got, but also build on the green jobs in some fantastic sites we have, particularly on the coast? So if I could start with Janet and then go on to Llyr, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I actually believe, not just here in the north, but generally across Wales, I think that we could actually be a world leader in protecting our environment, which is why we as a party, we've called on the Welsh Labour-led government to legislate far more into more ambitious targets, improve nature biodiversity. I think, you know, we're all aware of the climate emergency statement, an announcement that was made by the Welsh government. But if you were to say to me, well, what meat has gone on the bone there to actually where that would mean, you know, an increase of jobs, there's very little there. There's been very little legislation. There's been very little in terms of resources, you know, sort of put on one side. And by us pushing, well, currently it would be the Welsh Labour government, but obviously if we were in power ourselves, unless you have bigger ambitions and greater stronger legislation where it's not just an ask and it's not just a wish list, you know, actions speak a lot louder than words. And by putting it into legislation, really ambitious targets, I mean, people will be aware of, you know, as you've rightly pointed out, Jonathan, here in North Wales in particular, that there's quite a few green jobs that will be coming, but then sometimes we don't always benefit from those. Some of the companies will then bring their skilled workforce with us. That's not what we want. We want, as you've said, the brain drain that's going out of Wales. We need to be upskilling our youngsters so that when these projects go ahead, in terms of like greater wind farms, electric vehicles, hydro, these kind of jobs, really, we've got to make sure through the education system that we actually have those skilled people staying, you know, being educated in Wales and staying in Wales and getting into that green jobs and the green economy. And I was really proud to support Llyr with his amendments, you know, but I'm afraid the numbers didn't help at all. But yeah, I think you've got, you know, it goes back into the education system because, you know, people will invest, these companies will invest in green jobs if they know that they've got a skilled workforce willing to take on those jobs. But we're quite lucky with, you know, with some of the projects there's more lice, you know, there's so many potentials here. Tidal Lagoon, North Wales Tidal Lagoon, I'd love to see that come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely, Janet. I completely agree. And I think that, you know, you spoke about the brain drain, the fact we're losing people. And admittedly, there has been some good steps, you know, in terms of North Wales. We've got, you know, got hydrogen coming to Ynys. We have got some fantastic steps certainly coming that way. But Llyr, if I could just come to you now, is that we've already spoke about bringing, you know, good, green, high quality jobs. But how would you say, from a Plaid Cymru perspective, could you bring this to North Wales? And I suppose that the way is, obviously, as Janet says, it is through a wider change in terms of education. It's through making sure these companies that do move to the region offer, let's say, degree apprenticeships, for example. That would be a fantastic way to get people locally upskilled, trained, and into these high quality jobs. Do you see it as a way to grow local economies and retain talent, in particular those that have been hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic?
In a word, yes. I think you only have to look at sort of some of the big renewable energy companies that have come to Wales. You know, one of the first things they do is link up with FE colleges, create apprenticeships, you know, create those courses that will give them a pipeline of employees coming through, you know, skilled employees. And we need to replicate that in the context of nature. You know, building back, you know, greener should mean a boom in environmental jobs, an absolute boom. When you look at, you know, the public goods agenda, you know, that's being pursued in terms of land management, when you look at sort of tree planting targets that we need to be achieving in Wales, and it isn't a case of planting trees and thinking you've done the job. Those need to be properly managed. So you need people who have the skills to be able to help you to do that. You know, look at your designated sites across Wales, both terrestrial and marine. You know, they need to be improved. We need people to work on those. We need to designate new sites. You know, and all of those skills, I think. Natural flood solutions is another one. We need people who, you know, have the skills to deliver those outcomes that we all want to see. So I've no doubt it's going to be, you know, boom time for the sector. But what I want to see is that we actually have an Indigenous workforce locally who have the skills to deliver those opportunities, setting up their own consultancies, their own companies, you know, their own businesses, and not just always depending on others coming in and doing what we could do for ourselves. Now, yes, we need, you know, to work with other companies, of course. There's, you know, no need to be insular about it. But too often we've seen it happen in other sectors. So, you know, it's about making sure that we have people with those skills in the first place. But I would say something as well about another sort of scheme that we're proposing. We're Plaid Cymru in the next government, we would offer a youth jobs guarantee. All 16 to 24-year-olds who aren't in full-time education, who don't have alternative employment, would be guaranteed a job. Yeah. Now, some people call it sort of some sort of national service, if you like. Well, you know, you can call it that if you want. I'd rather call it a youth jobs guarantee. But I would see it, you know, a major part of it, working on green recovery projects for young people to have those experiences and opportunities. And there'd be a clear criteria, you know, the employment would have to be with a business or an organisation, obviously, for at least, say, 25 hours a week, you know, paid at least at the living wage level. Those jobs shouldn't be jobs that those businesses or organisations were already offering. You know, there needs to be additionality. And I think when you do that, I think you give those young people the experience, because it can be a vicious circle sometimes. You can't get a job unless you can put on your CV that you've got the experience, and you don't get the experience very often unless you get the job. So we need to try and break that cycle. And also, of course, having those sort of working opportunities will really help with the confidence of many young people, you know, their self-esteem, their ambition in life, you know, and maybe they would wish then to pursue further training. And we need to link that back into some of the, you know, the wonderful sort of education establishments we have in North Wales. If you're thinking of land-based training and environmental sort of careers, then we have, you know, Llyr here in Ruthin is just a few miles down the road. You know, it's all about land-based skills, really. Norfolk as well, you know, I know Glyndŵr and Cambria are working together there to really develop that over the next few years. As well, of course, as Llyr, you've got Bangor University, you know, Glyndŵr University I mentioned. So we really need to make sure that everything dovetails, everything works, you know, mutually sort of complements each other. But of course, the key thing here is we need those plans based on building back greener in order to offer those opportunities in the main. And, you know, if we don't do that, then we're not building back greener and we're failing in terms of the climate emergency.
Yeah, thank you for that, Llyr. I think there's some real big takeaway ideas there for, I know, the young people on this panel, but also the wider young people watching. And I think the jobs guarantee is an interesting one, because in my work in economics, I've looked at different countries who have done that in the past. So I think we better organise a chat here at some point. It'll be interesting to talk to you about that, as I do have some views on that. You'll be shocked to hear. So yeah, I think that again, a real fantastic discussion, everyone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some of the questions that we've had through the chat function. And this time, I think I'm going to give each question one Senedd member and one young person, because these questions, rather than being policy based, they are quite wide. So the first question we had through is, would a central government investment in the green recovery be possible whilst building back from COVID? So I take it that's around the monetary and the fiscal issues in terms of deficits we're facing at the moment. And what could the impacts of that look like for young people's employment within the sector? So I'm going to come for Megan first, if that's okay, on that question.
Would you mind repeating the question, please?
Of course I will, yeah. Would a central government investment in the green recovery be possible building back from COVID, given the financial challenges? What could the impacts of that look like for young people's employment within the sector? Okay.
Well, I think in terms of coming back from COVID, I think the biggest thing is prioritising. You know, COVID's a huge, it's one of the biggest things that's affected the UK in years, and I think you've got to, yes, it's been as a huge detriment to the economy, but you've got to kind of have a pool of money there for future issues that will arise because of climate change and all of those kind of things. So I think, yes, it might be difficult to provide money for kind of green investment, but it's got to be there to kind of mitigate future impacts, whether that be providing more jobs to mitigate or directly through like things like planting trees or building offshore wind farms and things like that. But I think some sort of pot of money from the government would massively help young people get jobs, because this is a point I might ask Janet or Llyr to answer is, you were saying that young people struggle to get jobs because they don't have the skills necessarily, and you were saying that you want to provide the jobs through the job security scheme you were talking about, but with the what's it called, the curriculum, with the national curriculum, with schools being able to design their own, what's to stop them saying we won't provide skills for young people to be able to get into those kind of jobs? I think a central payment from the government would be able to facilitate schools to possibly hire people to provide training, so that once they leave school, they do have core skills to be able to get into job schemes that you were proposing, Llyr, and such, if that makes any sense.
No, I certainly picked out the key points from that. Is that, yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I will pass that along to Janet first, if that's okay. In terms of, and I'll link it back to our initial question, so if you could answer Megan's question and mine, that would be fantastic. Is that obviously your party are in the UK government, they're in power, and obviously I know they're not in power in Wales at the moment. But do you think that central government investment is the answer to build back greener?
Well, thanks, Jonathan. I'm actually the transiting growth, because of course the UK is the first country to legislate to eliminate our contribution to climate change by 2050 and the fastest in the G20 to cut emissions. I think, and I would say this, I guess you would say, but I've seen it for myself, I've witnessed it at first hand. The Welsh Labour government, they need to show greater leadership in this and ambition in tackling Wales's contribution to climate change. I'm also concerned to see that very little within the budget 21-22 supports the potential for a green recovery. I mean, we know how we've been let down with the Clean Air Act, which should have been implemented, this term. It hasn't been. We've seen real terms cut in terms of funding and support for private hydro has been scrapped. So many of the schemes for hydro that people were really proud to small schemes for farmers and, others, to have the rug pulled under them was not a good move. I think that Welsh government is failing on green energy. Since 2018, the total amount of electricity generating from renewables only increased by 0.6%. Welsh solar PV capacity only increased by less than 1% from 2019, and there were only 5 new hydro projects commissioned in 2019, increasing the total hydropower capacity by less than 0.2%. So, we would be supporting the aspiration to reach net zero agricultural emissions by 2040. And our party, we would like to see an emergency green summit. I managed to win the legislative proposal to bring about a debate in the Senedd recently on banning single-use plastic and eliminating avoidable plastic waste. I mean, for goodness sake, when I was re-elected in 2016, it was mooted in the first term. About banning single-use plastic, and here we are now in 2021 just talking about it. You know, I keep saying actions speak louder than words, and under a Conservative government, I can assure you that we would have taken far more robust action in terms of banning single-use plastic and eliminating avoidable plastic waste. We'd introduce a drinks return, containers return scheme, you know, and we would actually put into legislation absolute robust steps that will protect our environment, help with the climate emergency, and provide those green jobs that are so badly needed.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Janet. I think you make some really important points in terms of where we're at the moment with the environment in Wales. And I think that even though we can look at it from a Welsh perspective, I think if you look from where Wales is across the world on the environment, you know, Janet will know this and Llyr will know this better than anybody, it's when you meet with these different groups and you in the Senedd and beyond, is they always like to give you graphs and they always like to give you handouts, and I get piles of them every time I go to these meetings. And it's interesting when you look at Wales's progress compared to even European countries that are similar size, similar population. And I think that, you know, we are a bit behind, as you say, on green energy and green jobs. But Llyr, I think it'll be interesting to hear where you come from this now. So answering the question that I obviously gave to Megan, and also Megan's question about jobs too, is that what's your vision for the way forward? Is it government investment that's going to spark the green recovery in Wales?
Well, certainly government investment has a key role to play. I don't think government on its own, especially in Wales, can afford to pay for it all, because obviously we don't have the same sort of funding and financial powers as the UK government has. The UK government is limiting, for example, the amount of borrowing that the Welsh government can do, despite the UK government, of course, borrowing record amounts of money now to get itself out of the situation and to invest in building back greener. You know, they're not giving us those powers in Wales to be able to emulate that. So I think we need to be aware, you know, that as much as we'd like to do, we are being restrained. And Janet was talking about the lack of ambition from Welsh government. Well, the Welsh government's ambition is exactly the same as the UK Conservative government's ambition. It's net zero by 2050. So I'm not sure whether she was criticising her own party there, but we won't go there because I know we don't want to get too party political, but I thought it was interesting. Look, Welsh government and all governments need to be much more creative in the way that they come up with funds to pay for some of these schemes. You know, we've been talking in the past about sort of, well, borrowing is one way. I mean, that's what the UK government does. When they need more money, they borrow it. You know, we've seen it in this pandemic. That's what every country around the world does. Record sort of low levels of interest at the moment means that borrowing is probably one of the best ways, you know, to finance and to fund some of these major schemes, particularly major infrastructure schemes. I think there's been talk of green bonds. I think that's been spoken about for years. You know, we really need to pursue those opportunities in Wales and see if, you know, if we can really get moving on that agenda. And, you know, we're talking about cost here, the short-term immediate cost, because we're not, and then we neglect to think about what the cost of not acting is. You know, so you could say that any investment in sort of climate change mitigation or you know, environmental projects, it's an invest to save scheme. You know, if you invest now, then you're actually saving money over the longer term. So the way that these sort of systems come up with, you know, whether this investment makes sense or not, I think, is too focused on the here and now and not sort of taking enough account of longer term costs. I also feel that the private sector need to step up to the plate here. You know, I mean, I know you know, many of you I'm sure will know of examples, for example, of flooding in communities around Wales. The Conwy Valley is one. You know, every time there's flooding in the Conwy Valley, the rail line closes because the railway has been washed away in parts. Well, you know, where is Network Rail? It costs them millions of pounds, millions and millions to fix that every time. You know, it's an annual event very often in the Conwy Valley. Well, where are they that they maybe don't invest in some sort of flood management schemes and natural flood management, so that, you know, we can maybe nip this in the bud and don't have to face these huge consequences in future. Likewise with insurance companies. You know, we know that places like Llanrwst have a huge sort of flooding issue. Why don't we really sort of work with insurance companies for them to part fund some of the major investment that's needed, because it'll save them money. I don't see that the public sector should be having to stump up every time.
Again, I think some real interesting points. And what I'm actually liking here is the fact that obviously, Janet and Llyr, it's obviously in places you may have your political differences, but it's nice to see that on many of these issues in terms of the lack of action and the fact that actions speak louder than words. There is consensus between you, and I can see that the young people in front of me, Jacob and Megan, are nodding. So that is generally a good sign in Jonathon rule number 1 book of politics. But we will move on from there now. I have one last question that I'm going to put forward before we move on to our final ask. And I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this one to Janet to start with, is what ways could help those with disabilities, learning or physical, overcome barriers that can stop them from getting into environmental jobs? What else have I got here? One example is a lot of environmental roles in North Wales are in rural areas and are not accessible by public transport, which prevents anyone who can't drive due to disability or being able to apply for that role. The reason I'm asking you this is obviously I know you were the Welsh Conservatives disability champion for a while with Mark Isherwood. So what are your views on that?
Well, first off, we would give all 16 to 24-year-olds a green card, which would provide free bus travel and a third off rail travel. You know, we would help our young carers and those in or leaving the care system to access post-16 education, including through the introduction of a concessionary fare scheme. And also, we believe firmly in a young adult carers future grant of £60 a week. We'd want to see an undertaking of a full-scale review of the vocational qualifications, apprenticeships, and training systems in Wales, focusing on employer-led qualification development and better promotion of employment. And we'd want to strengthen further education in Wales by providing FE colleges an extra £20 million to upgrade colleges and support FE staff. Half the times, you know, when people, as you rightly point out, it's not just disabled people, but it's young people in general. They can't afford to go for interviews. They can't afford, you know, here locally in the rural parts, you know, I had somebody who phoned me the other day that the last bus home is at 7:30 at night, and yet they're supposed to be working till 10 o'clock at night. So they're not able to take that job because it just finishes too late. Well, you know, I mean, again, you know, it's a backward step. You know, we would expand degree apprenticeships so people are able to develop the skills and experience that they need so that they can take advantage of new job opportunities. And we would also introduce a second chance fund to enable people to access further education courses to help them develop their existing skills or to retrain, because we've got people now, we're in you know, sort of a big problem in terms of people where they've had a career in something and that career has fallen, and we need to actually, you know, you need to see initiatives coming forward in terms of vocational skills as well, so that, you know, people can retrain. Yeah, but it is unless you have the transport and the facilities in place to support, you know, our carers and our disabled students, then we're not going to get anywhere. And they aren't either. What does annoy me is I've seen some really bad examples of poor pay when people have taken on disabled young employees, and again, that's unacceptable.
No, I think I completely agree, Janet. And I think that, again, I think we can all agree from previous experience, if it's with yourself and Llyr through casework, or I'm sure myself, Jacob, Megan will agree, is that mobility is a big issue in terms of public transport. And I think that and it's actually quite an interesting one, when I actually sat down with a focus group of young people when we were talking about the environment just before Christmas, is that Llyr, they loved your idea of a jobs guarantee, and Janet, they loved your idea of a green card. So I think that there's fantastic ideas coming from both of you, and I think that that is a real good step in the right direction. So I'm just going to go to Megan and Jacob now. If you could just have 1 minute each just before I move on to our third and final ask, is that obviously I've just given a summary of the different issues that young people are facing. I said about mobility, and Janet was saying about costs, and then Llyr was saying about work and jobs. Is that if you could have in 1 minute, Jacob, if that's okay, you first, is that what is one thing that you would like to see the next Welsh government do to make a change for young people?
Okay, so the one thing which I feel would be most important for the Welsh Government to sort of change for young people would be for the young people to be able to play an active role, like more, make it so that the young people can effectively communicate to you as like members of the Senedd and the Welsh Government, to be able to tell you what they would like to see in their local areas and as Wales for a whole. So as I think like a lot of these issues come down to more as a person by person basis, like each person would feel differently about them. And it's quite important that everyone's sort of viewpoints are considered. And I know that that's like quite a lot of people, but it's more about strengthening that connection between members of the Senedd and Welsh Government and young people, so that the young people's voices can be heard and adequate change can be put in place.
Yeah, well, luckily for you, Jacob, that's what Ask Free is all about. So we will have time to discuss that in just 1 minute. Megan, if you could just, I know you're obviously graduating very, very soon. So if you could just, in under 60 seconds, one point that you would like to see policymakers change from the Welsh Government.
I think the thing that I would like to see, and this isn't me pushing the 3 asks deliberately, but I think it's implementing the 3 asks into all considerations that policymakers make in regards to young people, even beyond the Our Bright Future project, because they're so brilliant in that they overarch kind of all aspects of what young people face. They apply to young children in schools, they apply to to myself who's in university and going to look for a career. And then the 3rd ask, which we're going on to, which just gives young people a voice, which is crucial in not only just engaging young people in society and in politics, but actually making them feel like they can kind of make change, positive change.
Yeah, do you know what? 2 fantastic points to finish what has really been a really thought-provoking discussion on our 2nd ask. Now, on to our 3rd and final ask. Ask 3 is policymakers, employers, businesses, schools and charities to pay more attention to the needs of young people and the environment. And while this event is a fantastic example, in my view, of connecting young people with 2 leading policymakers in Wales, I would like to open the floor to all panelists on this final question. It's a given that Wales has taken the move to extend the vote and extend the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds. And I know both Senedd members will know that I was heavily involved with the Llyr in working on this topic, so I was delighted that it passed. Is that, what do you see as the best way that young people can be empowered and their voices are heard on the environment, and what action can be taken on this? So if I could go to Janet first, what do you think about that?
Well, I think on this one, we've already started, and I think it's got collective support. Well, first off, I'm a real advocate of school councils, be it even primary schools, and then obviously secondary schools. And I think the initiative of the Youth Parliament has just been fantastic. I mean, I saw you, Jonathon, when you first started, and I thought you were excellent at the beginning, but you've come on in leaps and bounds, and and you've everybody, every single member of the Youth Parliament has brought their own sort of perspective, their dedication, enthusiasm, and I just think that's been one of the fantastic things coming forward. I think that it's one thing introducing the votes at 16. I want to see more in the more about our democratic processes in the curriculum, and I'd like to start seeing younger candidates coming forward, because at the moment the Senedd in particular is not representative of the people that we serve, that we're there on whose behalf we're there. So I would like to see more young candidates coming forward, yeah, I think that really we're starting to move in the right direction on that. Yeah.
Well, do you know what? I thank you very much for your kind words on me, but of course the Welsh Youth Parliament as a whole. You know, you said about my growth personally, and I certainly felt that in terms of what it's enabled me to do and how I've grown as an individual. So thank you for that. And I think that the Welsh Youth Parliament, as you say, it has done some fantastic things, and it has been brilliant on the environment, as we're talking about today. Is that about the three asks of our bright future? But of course, one of our top 3 issues was the environment. So yes, we have been a stalwart and a champion for the environment, and long may it continue. That's what I say. Is that Llyr? Can I bring you in here? And again, what way do you believe that young people can be empowered and their voices are heard on this issue?
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. I mean, I spent a number of years at the beginning of my career as a youth worker. So, you know, I'm quite passionate about the youth work curriculum, you know, and the sort of fundamental principles of giving young people educative experiences, participative experiences, empowering and expressive experiences. And that's what it is, really. I mean, we need to make sure that young people, you know, can take part in discussions and be part of forming policy and are actually in the room making a difference. Now, you know, there's been mention of the Youth Parliament, you know, as one obvious way that is happening. But I'm already agitating to take that further. You know, I'm not willing to settle for it as it is. We've had a few joint sessions between the full Senedd and the Youth Parliament, which have been great. But I really want to see how we can embed the work of the Youth Parliament into committee work in the Senedd, into committee inquiries. Can we take joint evidence sessions, you know, as part of that? So it needs to be much more dynamic, I think, in terms of that relationship, and not maybe an annual or you know, a sort of coming together now and again. I think we really need to be evolving, and I know it's early days, you know, of course it is, but you know, that's the aspiration. And I would support what Janet said about, you know, sort of school councils and local youth councils as well, and all of that. It's important as well. The danger is sometimes, of course, that it becomes some sort of tick box. You know, it becomes something so that other people can say, oh yeah, we've got young people involved. You know, it needs to be done properly and in a way that's happening on young people's terms and not on those sort of bodies or organizations' terms. So I think that's important as well. Now, I mean, one of the things, the Youth Advisory Board that's been mooted as one of your asks, I think is a wonderful idea. That the government has a plethora of advisory boards, you know, in every single department, really. They have these experts and these people who come and tell them how to, you know, encourage factories to locate in Wales and how to do this, that and the other. And I think, you know, getting a young people's perspective around different portfolios would be a wonderful innovation. You know, if I was Minister for the Environment after the election, then I can tell you now that is something I would be more than willing to actively pursue. Because I think, you know, it's hearing those voices is when you actually hear a perspective maybe that isn't the one that you're used to in the room, you know, and sometimes those are the best ideas because very often ministers have people telling them what they can't do. And I think we need to sort of break out of that a little bit. The other thing I would say is, why limit it to governments? Why can't we as members of the Senedd individually have sort of advisory groups of young people looking at what constituency work we should be focusing on?
That's good.
You know, it's keeping that engagement live, isn't it? And making it dynamic and making it meaningful. Far too often, you know, people think, oh, I've got a Twitter account and I'm on Facebook, and you know, the more adventurous would probably be on Instagram. That's a joke, by the way, but there we are. But that's how people perceive it, don't they? Oh yeah, we're doing the youth stuff. You know, we're on social media and that's it. You know, well, sorry, it doesn't work like that.
No, I think there's some really, really good points there, I think, from both of you. Can I just say, Llyr, your Instagram content is very good. I have to say, I'm pretty impressed as far as Senedd members go. And I think that both of you said about, you know, bringing young people into decision making and really young people diversifying advisory boards. And I tell you what, if young people can make those advisory boards any more dynamic, well, it's a good day. Because I tell you what, the amount of advisory boards that we have that let's just say could do with doing a bit more would be fantastic, and getting young people to really give them, you know, a kick up the backside would be fantastic. I just want to move this on now to Jacob and Megan very quickly. is that just one idea each before we move on to some questions and a wrap up, is that one idea, your ideal situation. So but let's just say 10 years down the line, and I hope this is true, that you two are Senedd members and you are in the position of Janet and Llyr, is that what would you do to engage young people, given your experience in the forum as young people? Let's start with Megan, please.
I think, well, by 10 years, I hope this is kind of a thing already, but I'd recognise and acknowledge young people as a kind of demographic in politics, and a group of people that you're trying to get on your side. I think, you know, what are policymakers actively doing to engage young people in, you know, making them, you know, in getting them on their side and supporting their party or supporting their manifestos. And not just from kind of like a policymaker side, but also employers. What are employers doing to actively engage young people to want to go after their job vacancies? And I think actively, you know, acknowledging that, you know, young people are valuable. You know, we do have things to contribute to society. We do work hard. We do and you know, it's diversifying your pool of ideas to try and make society a better place. Really, that's probably a bit of an idealistic view, but we'll go with it.
Trust me, that if I've learned anything in the last 2 years, is there's nothing wrong with idealistic views, because sometimes they can become a reality, and that's good. I tell you, it's good for everybody involved. Jacob, could I have your view on this, please?
Yes, my view is that it's mainly agreeing with Megan's viewpoint that young people do have a lot to contribute to society as a whole, and that they're not as, I don't want to say incapable, but they can do a lot more than people who are a lot younger than them, like, but they can't do as much as adults. And it's about finding that sweet spot in the middle where young people can contribute a lot without having to be weighed down by a lot of this, the things which adults maybe needed to be weighed down by. Because I find that when talking to a lot of like my friends in general about these issues, we tend to come up with very sort of, we don't think about the very, oh, that wouldn't work, all that. We think about what we could do, as opposed to what well, we think about what we should do rather than what is actually viable, and then we try and dial it back a little bit. So I think it's more using young people for ideas on what to do, and then figuring out how it could be done in a practical sense could be more beneficial in that sort of like 10 years time sort of thing.
No, again, I think, again, some fantastic stuff there from both of you. I've got one last question now before I wrap up. And this is a question to Janet and Llyr, if that's okay. Is that we've discussed many topics tonight. We've discussed about youth engagement, we've discussed about jobs, we've discussed about education. Is that going forward now to the Senedd elections, they're only 9 weeks away, is that what is your one pledge on how you as policymakers can engage more young people in environmental decision making going forward? Could I start with Llyr first, please?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's engagement, it's meaningful engagement, it's talking to young people, it's involving young people, it's making sure that young people are a meaningful part of decision making. Very often, and too often, decisions are made for young people and not by young people. And I don't believe that's, you know, no other demographic would tolerate that. And just picking up on what Megan and Jacob said earlier, I'll give you a negative and a positive, just to sign off on maybe. The negative is, look at who votes. You know, I mean, if you're a younger person, you're less likely to vote than an older person. So cynically, why should we be surprised that, you know, the UK government puts a triple lock on pensions, you know, and looks after pensioners, or the Welsh government gives the older generation free bus passes? You know, it's why should we be surprised in that sort of cynical electoral arithmetic sort of outlook? Yeah. But the positive is, you know, every time I go and speak to a class full of students at college or yeah. So the secret is get out and vote, get young people out and vote. You know, it's one of the reasons we're giving 16 and 17-year-olds the vote is to, you know, because our decisions affect their lives. What we decide, what Janet and I vote for or against, very often directly affect your lives as much as anybody else. Now, if you choose not to vote, then I suppose you haven't got a right to complain when we get it wrong. Yeah. So it's all about empowering young people to have, you know, the determination to go out and vote. Because if you don't, then it's no wonder that, unfortunately, some governments and policies will be focused towards those who do.
You know what, I think that is a real golden nugget to leave with us. And as I know Janet knows really, really well, is that I seem to spend a lot of my time number crunching these days. And Llyr, you're not wrong, is that policies are a lot of the time directed towards older people, and quite rightly so, because they have needs. However, is that young people are often forgotten when it comes to these things. So I think, as you say, it's about striking the balance and getting the engagement right to get young people captivated and involved in decision making. Janet, your one pledge for today, please.
Well, you know, I've already mentioned that, you know, because it's been predominantly about the environment. So I would be banning straight away single-use plastic and eliminating avoidable plastic waste. I would be introducing a drink containers deposit return scheme and wanting to go much further. But the first thing I would do, I would be wanting to convene an emergency green economic summit. And as part of that, I would want youth engagement. I would want to run that with the, you know, youth parliament. I would want to run it. It would be very accessible. What I have noticed since I've been a member of the Senedd is there's dozens of consultations. You can type in and go on the Senedd website, the Welsh Parliament website at any time, and the Welsh Government one, I should say, and you will see a plethora of consultations. And yet the very people we serve are very rarely know about these consultations. So I would be wanting, you know, as has been mentioned before, looking at that demographic, making sure that the makeup of any advisory board, any economic green summit actually had a substantial representation of our young people, because at the end of the day, you're our future as well as your own.
You know what, again, some fantastic points there, Janet, and I like the idea of a green economic summit and getting young people involved, but also by making sure that, as I know Llyr said before and the panelists have said before and I said, it's about diversifying these different groups, getting young people involved in decision making and making it more dynamic. But again, some real fantastic great nuggets from both of you there, so thank you very much. Now, I mean, wow, hasn't time flown? Look at the clock, it is 7:30. Hasn't the last hour and a half gone quick? They say time flies when you're having fun, but my God, this is next level stuff. An hour and a half, I tell you what, I can't quite believe it. But yeah, just before I go, I just want to say a massive thank you to our two fantastic young panelists. We've got Jacob and Megan, our two politicians, Llyr Gruffudd and Janet Finch-Saunders, and I hope that everybody watching has enjoyed the panel session as much as I have, because I tell you what, I have absolutely loved every single second of it. Now, I've already said a massive thank you to our panelists, but I should also say a massive thank you to the Our Bright Future and North Wales Wildlife Trust team, because without them, this event would not have happened. But I'm going to say one last thing before I shut up and turn my mic off. I know you're going to have to hear my voice, it's all good. Is that I've got one last thing I want to say before I finish. And that is that those of you who were watching, who were 16 and 17-year-old, I have worked with Janet and Llyr over the last 2 years to push forward vote 16 and get more young people engaged in politics. So please, please, please use your vote on May the 6th and vote in the Senedd elections, because as tonight has shown, is that young people really can have a voice and really can make a difference in politics. So please, 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 if you can, use your vote and register within the next 3 weeks so you don't miss out. thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this panel session this evening. I'm very much looking forward to reflecting back on the panel session, making some notes, and hopefully having some further conversations with Llyr and Janet about some of the ideas they put forward. And now I'm going to pass over to Charlotte to make the closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for chairing such a brilliant evening of discussion. You've done yourself proud and North Wales Wildlife Trust proud. Thank you very much. And really, actually, this event wouldn't have been possible without you. You have been the link between Janet and Llyr and us. So thank you on behalf of everybody. And also from me at North Wales Wildlife Trust, thank you as well to all of our panellists, to Roberta from Our Bright Future for coming in, and for to Janet, to Llyr, Jacob and Megan for your input this evening and taking time out of your busy schedules, out of your busy studies. Jacob and Megan, I know you're both very busy at the minute. We really appreciate everything that you have done for us this evening. So diolch yn fawr iawn. And everyone at home watching as well, thank you. And for sending in so many great questions. We have had too many questions to actually put to the panel tonight. So sorry if we've not managed to get around to your question. And at the last count, we have engaged with about 800 people this evening. We've had loads tuning in on Facebook Live, and a steady number of people tuning in here on Zoom as well. So we hope that everyone at home, that you've enjoyed this evening as well, that it's been beneficial to you. You can follow North Wales Wildlife Trust on social media and visit our website, northwaleswildlifetrust.org.uk, where you can sign up to our e-news and keep up to date with upcoming events and North Wales Wildlife Trust activities. So that's everything from everybody here. Go and enjoy the rest of your evenings. We're 2 minutes over time. We've done really well there. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.